I discovered the daughter my husband never told me about, and she asked for my help. He said he never kept secrets from me. He said it like other men talk about the weather. Simple, ordinary, as if truth were a porch light you just flipped on every night. For 15 years, I believed him. I believed in our coffee mugs clinking at dawn, in the hum of our dishwasher, in the porch steps creaking under his boots every morning. So, when that girl's message appeared on my phone, my hands went cold. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones, quiet and deep, the kind that makes you forget you were ever warm. That day, I learned that love can be steady for years, until one secret knocks the breath right out of it. We lived in a small Midwestern suburb, the kind where folks still waved when they drove by and gossip moved faster than mail. Our home sat on Maplewood Lane, third house from the corner, blue shutters, porch swing that squeaked in rhythm with the wind. I used to tell Daniel that sound was our marriage in a nutshell, a little worn, but still holding steady. We'd been married 15 years. Not a perfect 15, but good ones. The kind you build day by day. Coffee brewing by 6, his travel mug waiting by the door, my crossword folded neatly beside it. I'd watch him back out of the driveway, left blinker always flashing too early, and I'd smile to myself. He was predictable in the sweetest ways. Daniel worked as a project manager for a roofing company. Hard, honest work that left him sunburned half the year and proud of it. He liked to say he fixed other people's roofs, so ours would always stay strong. Our 2 children, Miles and Ruthie, were mostly grown by then. Miles had his first apartment in Indianapolis, full of pizza boxes and ambition. Ruthie was away at college, studying to be a teacher and calling home twice a week, once to ask for money, once just to tell me she loved me. When the house got quiet after they left, I started learning what silence sounded like between 2 people who'd spent decades raising children. It wasn't empty, not yet, just new. We had our little rituals. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday church at St. Mark's, and dinner at the diner afterward. He always ordered the meatloaf. I always swore I'd try something different, and somehow, I never did. We'd split a slice of pecan pie and talk about the weather, the kids, and the neighbor's new puppy. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. A life of quiet certainty. Daniel wasn't a man of grand gestures. He was the kind of man who checked the locks twice before bed, who remembered to scrape the frost off my windshield before I left for the grocery store. I loved him for that. I loved the ordinary things. The scent of his aftershave lingering in the hallway, the clatter of his boots by the door, the way he'd hum when he fixed things. If anyone had asked, I'd have said I trusted him completely. That's what makes betrayal so sharp. You know, it only cuts when you never saw the blade coming. That evening, the one before everything changed, was just like any other. The sky was painted that soft pink blue of early fall. I'd been cleaning the study, wiping down shelves, humming to the sound of the clock ticking in the kitchen. The air smelled like lemon polish and paper. Old, familiar things. Daisy, our golden retriever, slept by my feet, her tail twitching in some happy dream. I remember pausing to look around the room. Daniel's neat handwriting on sticky notes, stacks of project files, a jar of loose screws that probably hadn't been touched in years. His space was always so tidy, so disciplined, like him. But that night, something tugged at me, a feeling I couldn't name. Maybe it was the way the sunbeam hit the bookshelf, or the way the air suddenly felt heavier. I told myself I was just being sentimental, caught up in the quiet. So I kept cleaning. If you've ever lived long enough with someone, you know their rhythm. When they're home, when they're distant, when something's off. Looking back, I think I'd already felt it for weeks. Little things. The way he started closing the study door more often, saying he needed to focus on paperwork. The way he carried his phone everywhere. To the garage, to the yard, even to the bathroom. I laughed about it once and called him a teenager. He laughed back, but his eyes didn't. Still, I didn't press. That's what we do, isn't it? We trust the people we love, even when something in us whispers that maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't. That night, after dinner, Daniel fell asleep early on the couch, the TV glow soft on his face. I tucked a blanket around him, kissed his forehead, and turned off the lights. He looked peaceful, and I wanted to believe everything still was. If only I'd known what I'd find the next day, hidden behind the filing cabinet, waiting quietly in a box that held the end of my marriage. It began, as most heartbreaks do, with something so small it almost slipped past me. A door closing. Not slamming, not locking, just closing. Daniel had never been the kind of man who needed privacy from me. We'd built our life in shared spaces. One bathroom, one bed, one messy kitchen counter where the mail always piled up. But that fall, I started to notice the soft click of the study door. Each time he'd smile and say, "Just trying to concentrate, sweetheart." And I'd nod, because that's what trust looks like when you're not ready to lose it. At first, I told myself it was harmless. He was probably working on tax forms or estimates for his roofing projects. Still, something about that sound, that quiet click, began to stay with me. I'd pass by the study and hear the low murmur of his voice. Sometimes he was on the phone, speaking softer than usual, words blending into a hush that made the air feel heavy. The first few times I told myself he was talking to a client. But there's a tone a man uses when he's talking about work, clipped, factual, a little impatient. This wasn't that. This was gentle, careful. And once, when I stepped closer, I could have sworn I heard him say, "I'm sorry." When I entered, he looked up, startled, like a boy caught stealing pie from the window. He smiled quickly, too quickly. "Oh, hey, just wrapping up?" He shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. I noticed his phone face down on the desk. Daniel never put his phone face down. Still, I brushed it off. That's the thing about long marriages. You don't jump to conclusions. You talk yourself down from them. That night, over dinner, I tried to study him without letting him see it. His hands looked the same, rough from years of work. His eyes, still that same soft hazel I'd fallen in love with. He laughed at something on TV, the same crooked grin. I couldn't find anything wrong. But sometimes, what's missing isn't a look or a word. It's a certain ease, a warmth that goes quiet. The next few days, the distance grew like fog. Small things. He started taking early morning walks before breakfast, saying he needed fresh air. He'd come back with his hair damp, his cheeks flushed, and his phone in his jacket pocket. He said he was checking weather reports for job sites. I wanted to believe him. Then came the envelope. It arrived on a Wednesday, one of those midweeks where the sky looks tired. I was sorting the mail when I noticed it. A pale blue envelope, no return address, handwriting neat and deliberate. For some reason, my heart skipped a beat. I placed it on the counter, meaning to hand it to Daniel when he got home. But when he walked in and saw it, his expression flickered, just for a second. Then he grabbed it too fast, smiled too easily. "Junk," he said, tucking it in his jacket pocket. "Probably a promo or something," I nodded. But the way his voice lifted at the end, light, almost forced, stayed in my chest. That night, he was quiet. We sat watching the news, and he barely touched his dinner. I could feel a wall between us, invisible but solid. By Friday, I had convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, we'd built a life together. You don't throw suspicion into that without cause. So I went back to cleaning the house, as I always did on weekends. It's funny how women clean when they're trying to steady their minds. There's something about the order of it. Dusting, wiping, folding. That's what led me to the study. I wanted to vacuum behind the filing cabinet, the one that never moved. Daniel always teased me about my spring cleaning in October. But that day, he was out running errands, and I had the house to myself. The air smelled like lemon polish and faint coffee. The afternoon sun stretched long across the floorboards. I moved the cabinet. Just a few inches. Enough to catch sight of a corner of cardboard. At first, I thought it was just an old box of receipts. But when I tugged it free, it was lighter than that and covered in a thin film of dust. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, brushing my fingers across the lid. Inside were letters, folded, tied with twine, photographs, and beneath them, a document sleeve, a birth certificate, the name, Amara. Father's name, Daniel Everett Harper. Date of birth, 14 years earlier. 2 years before our wedding day. My breath caught in my throat. The world seemed to tilt. The ticking of the wall clock faded, and the room went still. The kind of silence that hums. There was a photograph beneath the certificate. A little girl, no more than 7, smiling wide. 2 front teeth missing, sunlight spilling on her curls. Her eyes were unmistakable. Daniel's eyes. I sat there holding that picture, and every thought in my head scattered like startled birds. I wanted to be rational, to believe there was some explanation. Maybe he'd helped someone in trouble. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. but the truth sat heavy in my hands. His handwriting was on one of the letters. His name signed at the bottom, ink faded with time. He had known. I placed everything back carefully. Every photograph, every folded page. My hands were shaking, but I made sure it looked untouched. I even dusted the shelf again, as if that could erase what I'd seen. That night, when Daniel came home, I couldn't look at him the same. His voice, his gestures, they were all the same, but now they felt rehearsed. When he asked how my day was, I said, "Fine." But my voice had a tremor. I lay awake long after he fell asleep, watching the faint rise and fall of his chest. I wanted to shake him awake and scream, "Why didn't you tell me?" But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting with the headlights passing outside. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I made up my mind. I needed to know who she was. Not for him, for me. The next morning, I found her. A simple search. Her name, her mother's last name from one of the letters. And there she was. Amara Lynn, 14 years old, a high school freshman. Her social media profile showed a bright smile, brown eyes, and a hint of Daniel's dimple when she laughed. It felt unreal, like watching someone else's movie. But then her caption stopped me cold. "Miss you, Mom. I'll find him soon. You said he's a good man." I read that line again and again. My hands were trembling so hard I had to set the phone down. Her mother, gone. Her father, my husband, and she was looking for him. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal or the ache of that child's hope. For 3 days, I didn't say a word. I went through the motions, church, groceries, small talk with neighbors, while that secret burned behind my ribs. I'd wake in the middle of the night and think I heard the sound of a child crying. I'd open my eyes to the darkness and realize it was my own breath shaking. On the 4th day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I sent her a message. I didn't tell her who I was. I just said, "Hi, Amara, I knew your mother a long time ago. I think I can help you." My finger hovered over the send button for what felt like a lifetime. Then I pressed it. The message whooshed away, leaving a silence that filled the room like thunder. That was the moment my ordinary life ended, and the truth began to unravel. She replied 3 days later. "Hi. Thank you for reaching out. Did you really know my mom? I've been trying to find anyone who might know where my dad is." Her message was simple, polite, and sweet. There was no suspicion in her words, only hope. That raw, untarnished kind that only belongs to children who still believe in goodness. My throat tightened as I read it. I typed back carefully, pretending to be an old friend of her mother's. I asked gentle questions, how she'd been holding up, what she remembered about her father. I told myself I was doing this for clarity, but the truth is, I was afraid to face the man sleeping beside me. Over the next few days, our messages became longer. She told me her name was Amara Lynn, that she lived just 2 towns over. Her mother, Evelyn, had passed away a month earlier from ovarian cancer. Her words were tender and uncertain, a girl fumbling through grief while clutching the last thread her mother had left her. She told me my father's name before she passed, Amara wrote one night. Daniel Harper. She said he was a good man, that he didn't know about me. But she wanted me to find him, because she thought he'd want to know I exist. When I read that, something inside me splintered. I looked at my husband, Daniel, sitting on the couch, flipping through channels with that same easy calm I'd known for years. I could barely breathe. He was humming softly to himself, his glasses sliding down his nose, the lamplight soft on his face. The same man who kissed my forehead every night. The same man who promised forever. I excused myself, went to the kitchen, and cried into a dish towel. That night, after he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, reading Amara's messages over and over. Her words were full of longing, not anger, not bitterness, just a quiet hunger to be seen, to be loved. The next morning, I made a choice. I couldn't keep pretending. The truth was sitting too loud inside me. When Daniel came home that evening, I waited until he set down his keys. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Daisy, sensing tension, curled under the table. "I found something," I said. He looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "In your study," I continued. "A box. Behind the filing cabinet." For a moment, his face went still, every muscle tightening in quiet panic. Then came the practiced smile. "You've been cleaning again," he said lightly. "You always dig up old junk." "It wasn't junk," I whispered. "It was a birth certificate. Silence. He didn't ask whose. He didn't need to. When I said her name, Amara, he flinched. Not big, not dramatic. Just a slight wince, like a man hearing a ghost. Tell me the truth, Daniel. My voice was shaking. Who is she? He opened his mouth, closed it again. His eyes darted away, then back to mine. It was a mistake, he said softly. A long time ago. Before us. 2 years before, I said. She's 14. That means she was born while you were still telling me you were waiting for the right woman. He ran his hand over his face, exhaling hard. I didn't know she existed. I swear to you I didn't. Evelyn never told me. I stared at him, every beat of my heart a drum in my ears. Then why keep the letters? The photos? His voice cracked. Because she told me later. Years later, she said she didn't want anything from me. Just to know I was okay. And I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it would destroy us. It did, I whispered. You just didn't notice when it happened. He sat down, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time, he looked small. The man who'd built roofs for strangers couldn't find shelter for himself now. Mary, he said, my name trembling on his tongue. I was scared. You've got to understand, I didn't know how to fix it. Fix it? I laughed, a brittle, broken sound. You don't fix a child like you fix a roof, Daniel. He didn't speak after that. The house was heavy with quiet, the kind that chokes rather than soothes. I slept in the guest room that night. I could hear him pacing, doors opening and closing, drawers sliding shut. At one point, he stood outside the door. I saw the shadow of his feet through the crack. But he never knocked. The next morning, I made coffee and sat alone on the porch. The sky was gray, the air thick with the smell of rain. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing in the story of us. The tidy narrative of love, marriage, children, routine. I'd been so proud of the stability we built, but now I realized it had been balanced on a secret. He came outside eventually, looking worn and older than I'd ever seen him. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. I looked at him, the man I'd once trusted with my entire heart, and said, Tell her the truth. He blinked. Who? Your daughter, I said. She deserves to know you exist. She's been looking for you? His face went pale. You talked to her? I did, I said. Because you didn't. For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes. Not at her, but at me, for holding the mirror up. You had no right, he said. No right? I rose from the chair. You're right, Daniel. I had no right to find your lies. I just happened to trip over them while cleaning our home. Our life. You handed me that right when you hid a child from me. He stared at me, lips pressed tight. Then quietly, She doesn't need me. I shook my head. No, she doesn't. But maybe you need to face what you did. That broke something in him. He sat down on the porch step, head bowed, his hands trembling. I'm sorry, he whispered. I thought I could protect you. I looked out across our lawn. The same one we'd mowed together for 15 years. The same porch where our kids once played with sparklers every 4th of July. I realized then that the man I loved was gone. Not physically, but in essence. He'd buried himself beneath fear and guilt, and I didn't know if I'd ever find him again. Inside, the clock ticked. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, a rhythm that sounded too much like goodbye. Later that day, I messaged Amara again. I told her I knew where her father was, but that things were complicated. I asked if she wanted to meet. Not him, but me. She replied within minutes. I'd really like that, she wrote. I just want to understand. When I told Daniel, he shook his head. No, that's not a good idea. You don't know what you're getting into. I smiled sadly. Neither did you. That weekend, I drove to meet her. A quiet little cafe 2 towns over, where the walls smelled like cinnamon and coffee grounds. When she walked in, my breath caught. She was taller than I'd expected, with soft brown curls and a nervous smile. Mrs. Harper? She asked. I nodded. You can just call me Mary. We sat for hours. She told me about her mother, how kind she was, how she'd kept a picture of Daniel in a jewelry box all those years. I told her about the man I'd known, his laugh, his patience, his terrible singing voice. Somewhere between tears and shared stories, something in me softened. She wasn't the lie. She was the truth trying to surface. When I got home, Daniel was waiting by the window. You met her, he said, not asking. Yes, I answered. He closed his eyes. the weight of years pressing on him. What did she say? She said her mother told her you were a good man. He nodded, swallowing hard. I used to be. I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then prove it." And for the first time since I'd found that box, he didn't look away. The knock came on a Tuesday, right between the mailman's footsteps and the church bells that always ran 5 minutes slow. I was folding towels in the den, the afternoon sun in strips across the carpet, when Daisy barked a warning and then wagged like the intruder might have biscuits. When I opened the door, I knew her at once, even before she spoke. She had Daniel's eyes. "Hi," she said, breath jutting in the cool air. "I'm sorry to just show up. I think this is the address for Daniel Harper." She glanced at the mailbox number as if it might sprout a different answer if she stared long enough. "I'm Amara." For a moment, the world went quiet. The porch swing stilled. The oak leaves held their breath. I'd pictured this meeting a dozen ways. At a cafe, in a neutral place where the floors didn't know our footfalls. Not like this. With her on my porch, her backpack slung on one shoulder, a brave, tired tilt to her chin. I stepped aside. "Come in, sweetheart." I was not prepared for how young she looked up close. 14 going on 30, a subtle hollowness under her eyes that grief leaves behind like a pencil smudge. Her hair was pulled back, wisps escaping around her temples. The knuckles of the hand gripping her backpack strap were white. "Thank you," she whispered, and looked around our entryway like she was entering a museum. There were photographs everywhere. Miles with a missing tooth, Ruthie in a homecoming dress, Daniel and me at the county fair, holding a prize-winning pumpkin like it was our third child. My own life stared back at me, framed and dusted and arranged just so. I suddenly felt protective of them, of this curated story I had told myself for years. "Can I get you something?" I asked. "Tea? Hot chocolate? I just baked banana bread this morning." The lie surprised me. I hadn't baked a thing, but sometimes a grandmother's voice borrows comfort it intends to provide. "Tea would be nice," she said, as if the word had a memory tucked inside it. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and watched the blue flame catch. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and dog. If you'd walked in then, you would have said nothing was out of place. But there are days when a home is a stage set and the actors have lost their lines. I took out the good cups, white porcelain with a tiny gold ring at the rim, because I needed this moment to have dignity. She stood by the window, looking out at the yard. "It's pretty here," she said. "Quiet." "It is," I answered, and brought the tray to the table. She sat slowly, as if asking permission of the chair. When she wrapped both hands around the cup, I saw a tremor. The steam fogged the lenses of her glasses, and she laughed softly, embarrassed. She slipped them off and wiped them with the corner of her sleeve. It was such a teenager thing to do that I felt my throat close. "My mom used to drink tea in the afternoons," she said. When she wasn't feeling good, she'd say tea made her remember nice things. She glanced up at me, apologetic for bringing sorrow into my kitchen. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You don't have to be sorry for remembering your mother," I said. "In this house, we count remembering as holy work." She smiled, and in that movement the dimple appeared. Daniel's dimple, the one that used to surface when he forgot himself. A small ache uncoiled in me. I passed her the sugar and the little honey bear. She took neither, took a careful sip, and let her shoulders drop a fraction. "I wasn't sure this was the right place," she said. "But the counselor at school, she found an address, and I didn't want to wait anymore." "Counselor?" I asked gently. She nodded. "My mom passed 6 weeks ago. Ovarian cancer." The words were plain, as if she had said them to neighbors, teachers, cashiers, and couldn't afford to let them catch in her throat anymore. She told me his name before she died, said he was a good man. She said if I ever needed anything, to find him. She pressed her lips together. I don't know what anything is, but I thought maybe knowing where I come from is something. The kettle hissed in the back of my mind, even though it had long been moved off the flame. I folded my hands so she wouldn't see them shake. Did she ever tell him? I don't think so. Not then. She glanced at her backpack as if it held answers. I found some letters later. She swallowed. From a few years ago. They looked old. I think she told him then, but I don't know what he said back. My face did not move. Years of PTA meetings and funerals and hard conversations had trained it to hold. "I'm sorry you had to carry that alone." She looked at me. really looked like you look at a puzzle you intend to solve, and I felt naked in a way I hadn't since I was a young woman. She set her cup down carefully and spoke with a grace that didn't belong to 14. Are you his wife? The question sat between us like a live wire. I could lie. I could say I was a friend, a neighbor, a messenger, but there are moments God holds up a mirror and waits. I met her eyes. Yes, I said. I'm Mary. I've been married to Daniel for 15 years. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Her mouth made a small "oh," but without drama. She nodded slowly, like cataloging a fact. I'm sorry, she said, which broke me in a way his betrayal hadn't. I didn't want to make trouble. Sweetheart, I said, and I reached across the table, and she let me take her hand. You are not trouble. You are a child. You are a person. Trouble is what grown-ups make when they're afraid. We sat like that for a long minute, the kitchen clock keeping polite time. Daisy settled at her feet, as if she knew how to guard what was fragile. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past and the leaves lifted, and it seemed to me the world kept going even when a heart stalled. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Daniel's. He had come home early. I'd lost track of the hour. The back door opened, the chill rode in on his coat, and he called, Mary, you here? His voice was ordinary. He set his keys in the dish by habit. Then he stepped into the kitchen and saw. He stopped. His eyes went first to me, then to her, and then to our hands. The color fell from his face like a curtain. A brave man will sometimes look like a boy when the past walks through his door. Daniel, I said, low and even, my thumb soft against the back of Amara's knuckles. This is Amara, he knew. Of course he knew. Names have a weight when they've been carried in secret. He reached for the counter as if the room had shifted. Amara, he repeated, and the name thinned on his tongue. He looked at me, a plea or a warning, I couldn't tell which, in his eyes. Then he looked at her. He stalled. I'm Danielle. She stood, shouldering her backpack like a shield. Hi, she said. I'm sorry to come by. I just wanted to meet you. Silence. The kind that tells the truth more clearly than words. He swallowed. I didn't know, he said. The old line, the tired defense. I didn't know about you until later. He glanced at me. I should have said something then. I was scared. She nodded in a grown-up way that 14-year-olds shouldn't know. It's okay, she said, because she'd been trained to forgive adults who failed her. I'm not here for money or anything. I just wanted to know. If I had his eyes right, his breath broke. He took a step forward, then stopped. You do, he said, voice frayed. You have my mother's brow, but yes, my eyes. The wind moved across the yard, the maple tapping the window. He looked older than he had that morning, as if grief worked fast as weather. He glanced at me like a man asking permission to sit at his own table. Tea? I asked, and I didn't recognize my gentleness. We sat, the three of us, around the table where I had planned 1,000 ordinary meals. Amara told us small things. The name of her school, her favorite English teacher who loved Steinbeck, and the cat she couldn't keep because the apartment complex had rules. She spoke in those careful, hopeful sentences of someone who has learned not to ask for too much. Daniel listened like a man kneeling. He didn't touch his cup. He didn't reach for her. He nodded, and when she laughed, once at a joke about cafeteria pizza, I saw a kind of light pain cross his face, the kind you get when sunlight falls on a bruise. When she rose to go, dusk had already collected at the edges of the room. Thank you, she said, shouldering the backpack again. For the tea? For listening. Before you go, I said, and pulled a small card from the drawer. I wrote my number, our address, though she had it now, and on impulse, the name of a counselor I knew from church who worked with teens. If you need anything, I said. Rides, soup, a safe place to sit. You call me, do you hear? She nodded, tucking the card into her pocket like a talisman. I will. She turned to Daniel. You don't have to, she began, then changed her mind. Thank you for seeing me. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. He managed finally, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It couldn't be. But it was something true. When the door closed behind her, the house throbbed with quiet. I stood in the foyer a long time, watching the last of her move down the sidewalk. Shoulders squared, head up, a girl who had taught herself how to leave places kindly. I didn't turn when I spoke. She's a child, Daniel. She is a child you didn't meet in the light. I know, he said behind me, and a man can say, I know, 100 ways. This time it sounded like prayer and failure mixed. I faced him. I'm going to help her. It wasn't a question, and he knew it. He rubbed a hand across his jaw. What does that mean? It means, I said, and my voice had the steady strength my children used to borrow, that I will not turn her away to protect your reputation, or my pride, or our privacy. It means I'm calling the youth shelter at the mission to see what they can offer if she needs a bed. It means I'm driving her to meet the counselor at St. Mark's, who can help her walk through grief with someone trained to carry it. It means she will not be alone because we were afraid. He leaned against the wall, eyes closed. Mary, please, he whispered. Don't make this public. Public? I repeated softly, and something in me stood up straighter. Do you mean loud? Do you mean honest? Do you mean daylight? Secrets make a nest and call it privacy. I have no appetite for nests, he shook his head. You're angry. I am, I said. But more than that, I am clear. We were quiet a while, the two of us apart by years and a kitchen tile. The porch light ticked on, its sensor doing the small moral work it was built to do. When it gets dark, you bring light, I called Ruthie that night. I did not tell her everything, not yet. I only told her I might need her to be kind if a new girl walked into our lives. I can do kind, Ruthie said, careful, grown. Miles called without my prompting, and I heard in his voice that subtle alertness adult children get when they sense the ground shifting beneath the old house. Everything okay, Ma? He asked. Everything is moving, I answered, which was both honest and safe. After midnight, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, making a list like I've always done when life slides. Call the shelter, ask Pastor Jim about the counseling fund, see if Ruthie will spend Saturday afternoon with Amara so they aren't strangers when the inevitable comes. Search for teen grief groups. Pick up extra groceries, things that stretch. I wrote banana bread and then smiled at my earlier lie. I'd make 2 loaves in the morning. If a child crosses your threshold with hollow places, you do not let her leave empty-handed. Daniel came in, hair mussed from raking his hands through it. He looked at the list and then at me. Where do I fit in here? He asked, voice soft, not bitter but bewildered, like a man waking up after a storm and asking what to rebuild first. I met his eyes. Not unkind. Where you choose to, I said. But whether or not you stand up, I will. He nodded, and I could see the fight in him flicker, the old instinct to pull away, to hide, to manage. Then, to my surprise, he pulled out a chair and sat. What's the shelter's number? He asked, throat working. I'll call in the morning. I didn't praise him. I didn't scold. I handed him a pen. He wrote carefully, like a boy copying from the board, and I watched his hand as if watching a bridge being tested for weight. Later, after he went to bed and the house clicked into its nighttime noises, I stood by the sink and looked out into our dark yard. The maple branch tapped the window, steady as breath. I pressed my palm to the cool glass and felt faintly an answering thrum inside my chest. Sometimes a dilemma is only a doorway. You stand on the threshold and you choose. I chose the child. In the weeks that followed, choice became practice. I picked up Amara twice a week from school and drove her to the mission, where a tidy woman with kind eyes folded her into a program that had room for homework and hot meals and warmth that didn't ask questions first. I sat with her in Pastor Jim's office, where he said grace in that practical way of his that keeps grace from floating away. I watched her laugh at Daisy's clumsy gallop and, once, fall asleep on our couch with an algebra book tented over her face. I learned the names of her teachers and the rhythm of her quiet, and how grief sometimes looks like forgetting your coat in March. Not everything was noble. Neighbors noticed. Whisper's plate spun down the block. Is that Mary's niece? Did they take in a foster kid? I thought their kids were grown. I kept my face like a stone in a river. People could eddy around me or not, but they would not move me off my rock. At home, Daniel and I moved like 2 people who had learned to balance in a canoe. The smallest shift could tip us. There were nights we didn't speak, nights when the words were too heavy to lift. But there were also mornings when I'd find a sticky note on the kettle, his careful printing, Counselor apt, 4 p.m. I'll drive. Effort, even late, is a kind of confession. One Sunday after church, a woman from my circle stopped me by the coat rack. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said, pity sliding over her words like oil. People don't have to know. I looked at her coat, the expensive buttons, the thread hanging loose where a pocket had caught and been ignored, and said gently, people already know. The only question is whether they'll see love too. That afternoon, I baked the banana bread I had promised myself, and I wrapped a warm slice for Amara to take back to the mission. When I handed it to her on the porch, I saw the startle of gratitude in her eyes, that mix of surprise and relief that says, this time, the adult did the thing the adult said they would do. She stepped forward then, awkward, teenage, and hugged me. It was brief and fierce and a little clumsy, and it baptized me into my choice all over again. When she left, I stood on the porch and watched her walk toward the future. The porch swing creaked, sure as liturgy. Behind me, our house waited, the rooms knowing new names. I thought of Evelyn, this girl's mother, and I whispered into the late light, "She's safe tonight." Sometimes a dilemma is just a question that requires your life as the answer. That's what I learned on a Tuesday with tea. Never meant to become the kind of woman who stood between a man and his shame. But some battles pick you, not the other way around. Once Amara entered our lives, there was no putting her back in the box of secrets Daniel had built. She was sunlight, uninvited, unstoppable, the kind that shows every dust mote floating in the air. I'd promised her I'd help, and promises mean something when you've lived long enough to see how easily they're broken. The next few weeks were a blur of small acts that added up to something brave. I helped Amara enroll in an after-school program at the community center. I talked with the counselor at St. Mark's about finding her a grief support group. I drove her home after choir practice one evening, and she told me about a poem she'd written for English class. It was about beginnings disguised as endings. I smiled at that. She had no idea how wise she already was. Daniel stayed quiet through it all. He'd started sleeping in the den, said he didn't want to disturb me, but I knew it was the weight of guilt pressing him out of our bed. He left early for work, came home late, and tried to make conversation about the weather, the news, anything safe. I let him, most nights. You can't shout a man into honesty. One evening, Pastor Jim stopped by. He's been a friend for as long as we've lived on Maplewood Lane, and he has that rare kind of voice that can speak truth without bruising it. We sat at the kitchen table, he stirring his coffee slowly, me twisting the napkin between my fingers. "You're doing the right thing, Mary," he said. "The girl didn't choose how she came into this world. You're giving her a place to stand." "I don't feel noble," I said quietly. "I feel tired and angry and ashamed that my anger keeps circling back to him when I should be thinking about her." Pastor Jim smiled faintly. "You can do both. The heart's got more rooms than we give it credit for." That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after he'd left. The lamp made a warm pool of light, and outside, the rain came steady against the windows. I took out a fresh page from my notebook, the same yellow legal pad where I'd made my earlier lists, and began a new one. At the top, I wrote, "What forgiveness looks like now." I didn't know if forgiveness meant staying. I didn't even know if it meant peace. But I knew it started with truth, however ugly. So I waited until Daniel came home. He hung his coat, poured himself a glass of water, and looked at me like a man stepping into a courtroom. "Sit," I said softly. He did. "I talked to Pastor Jim," I began. "And I've been thinking, we can't live like this, half in the light, half hiding." He rubbed his temples. "I know. She's not a problem to be managed, Daniel," I said. "She's your child, your daughter. She deserves to be part of this family, however that looks now." He looked at me, eyes rimmed red. "You want me to just bring her here? Pretend this house isn't built on lies?" "No," I said. "I want you to take responsibility. I want you to show her you see her. That's all she's ever wanted." He nodded slowly, like the words were heavy but familiar. "And what about us?" he asked. "Where does that leave you and me?" "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But I know I can't live married to a man who hides behind silence. If you want forgiveness, you'll have to earn it with honesty, not apologies." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're stronger than I deserve." I smiled sadly. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just too old to waste what time I have left on cowardice." The next Sunday, I asked him to come with me to the mission where Amara was staying. He didn't answer at first. I saw the war in his face, the pull of guilt against the weight of pride. But finally he said, "If you'll drive." We rode in silence, the hum of the tires the only sound between us. When we arrived, Amara was helping in the kitchen, handing out lunch plates to the other kids. She froze when she saw us, her hand trembling just slightly on the ladle. "Hi," she said softly. Daniel cleared his throat. "Hi, Amara." He stepped closer, awkward, like a man approaching holy ground. "I'm sorry it took me so long," he said. "Your mother deserved better from me." "You did too," her eyes filled. "She said you were a good man," she whispered. He swallowed hard. "I used to be. Maybe I can try again." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she reached out, a hesitant, trembling touch, and he took her hand. Just that. No grand gestures, no tears, no speeches, but it was enough to make the air in the room shift. When we drove home, Daniel didn't speak. I didn't either. But I saw something uncoil in him, something that had been twisted for years. That evening, he sat on the porch, staring at the street. I brought him a cup of coffee and joined him. The sunset was a soft burn of orange and lavender across the sky. He said, "I told her I'd come again next week. Maybe we could all go." I nodded. "That's a start." He looked at me then, really looked. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" I took a long breath. "I think forgiveness isn't something you ask for," I said. "It's something you prove you deserve over time. But helping her, that's the first step." He nodded, tears shining in the corners of his eyes. For the first time in months, he didn't try to hide them. We sat there until the sky went dark, the street lamps flickering on one by one. A breeze rustled the geraniums I'd kept alive all those years, and for a moment, I thought about how something can bloom even after being broken by frost. Later that night, I tucked the yellow pad back into the drawer. The top of the page still read, "What forgiveness looks like now." I didn't cross it out. I left it open, unfinished. Because maybe forgiveness, like healing, is never one moment. It's 1,000 small choices to stay kind when you could stay bitter. That was the night I realized something important. I couldn't fix my marriage. Not entirely. But I could choose to heal what was innocent and true, and sometimes that's all the redemption a heart needs. Part 6. Consequence and healing. 1,000 words. They say every secret has a half-life. Ours began to decay the moment Amara crossed our threshold. Word spread fast in our little town, faster than I'd hoped. Slower than gossip usually travels when there's pain attached to it. Mrs. Daly from 2 houses down was the first to mention it. Over her fence, trimming her roses with that polite curiosity, "Small towns, perfect. So," she said, trying for lightness, "you've got a young guest? Some kin we didn't know about?" I smiled the way polite women smile when they've decided not to feed the rumor mill. "Something like that," I said, and kept hanging the laundry. By the next Sunday, the whispers had found their way to church pews. You could feel them in the air. The pause in conversation when Daniel and I walked in together, the way eyes darted then softened. Some were kind, some weren't. I kept my chin up. I'd told Daniel once, "If we're going to walk through fire, we might as well do it standing tall." He tried. I'll give him that. He started meeting Amara every Saturday afternoon. Ice cream at Mason's, walks by the river. Slowly, cautiously, he began to learn her. Her favorite subject, history. Her dislike for spicy food. The way she hummed when she read. He'd come home quieter afterward, like he'd touched something tender in himself he hadn't felt in years. Once, I asked him how it went, and he said, "She laughs like her mother." Then he went upstairs and closed the door, and I didn't follow. The real consequence wasn't the gossip, it was the distance. The space between what we'd been and what we were now. Every kindness felt like a truce, not a marriage. There were mornings when we'd share coffee at the table, and I could see he wanted to say something, but guilt makes men clumsy with words. Amara became part of our lives in small, steady ways. She'd come by after school, help me water the garden, or sit with Daisy and do her homework. Sometimes we'd bake together, real banana bread this time. Once, she asked if she could call me Miss Mary. I told her she could call me whatever made her feel safe, and slowly the ache in my chest started to soften. Not disappear, just ease its grip. One afternoon, I drove her to her school play. She'd been cast as a supporting character, a shopkeeper in some small-town drama the students wrote themselves. Daniel had promised to come, but he called last minute, saying a job site emergency would make him late. I could hear the apology in his voice, but also the fear. He still wasn't sure how to show up without shame. So, I went alone. The auditorium smelled like popcorn and floor wax, the kind of smell you only find in schools. Parents shuffled programs, kids whispered behind curtains. When the curtain rose, there she was. Amara, standing under the stage lights in a too-big costume, her voice clear and sure. I felt tears rise before I could stop them. Near the end, she looked out into the crowd, scanning, searching. When her eyes found mine, she smiled and gave a tiny wave, almost imperceptible. Then, loud enough for the audience to hear, she said her line. Sometimes home is the place that stays, even when everything else changes. The theater went quiet for half a heartbeat. I don't know if anyone else felt what I did. That strange, beautiful ache of something healing right in front of you. Afterward, she ran up to me in the hallway, her cheeks flushed, her curls sticking to her forehead. "You came," she said, breathless. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, hugging her tight. "I wouldn't have missed it." She pulled back, eyes bright. Dad texted. He said he's sorry. He said next time, he'll be here. I smiled and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Then next time, we'll save him a front row seat. When I got home, Daniel was waiting on the porch. The air was thick with the smell of rain. The sky streaked purple with twilight. He looked up when he saw me. "How was it?" "She was wonderful," I said simply. He nodded, eyes wet. "I almost drove there. Sat in the truck and couldn't make myself go in. Thought maybe I didn't have the right." I took a deep breath. "The right isn't something you earn by being perfect," I said softly. "It's something you prove by showing up, even late." He stared at me for a long time, then whispered, "You should have given up on me." "I almost did," I admitted, but then I realized she still believes you can do better. And maybe that's worth standing for, one last time. We sat there in silence, the kind that didn't feel hostile anymore, just honest. Weeks turned into months. Daniel began attending counseling with Amara and her mentor at St. Mark's. He started volunteering at the shelter once a week, fixing leaky sinks and mending doors. The man who once built roofs now patched other people's lives, one small repair at a time. Our marriage didn't go back to what it was. Some things don't. The trust that cracked never sealed entirely. But it transformed into something quieter, a companionship built on respect instead of illusion. One spring morning, while planting the geraniums again, Daniel brought me a cup of coffee. "You were right," he said. "About what? Sometimes love isn't staying. Sometimes it's helping someone else find where they belong." I smiled faintly. "And sometimes it's both." That summer, Amara moved into a small apartment near her school. She came by often, still called me Miss Mary, and sometimes the best cook in Indiana, which made me laugh every time. On her 16th birthday, she invited us both to dinner. When the cake came out, she handed me a folded card. Inside, in her careful handwriting, it read, "You were my home when I didn't have one. Thank you for seeing me." I felt the tears before I could stop them. Across the table, Daniel wiped his eyes too. Later that night, when I sat alone on the porch, I thought of everything we'd lost and everything we'd gained. Pain had hollowed me out, yes, but in that hollow, something softer had grown. Compassion, truth, grace. The world outside was quiet. The porch light hummed, moths dancing around it. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed, and it sounded like a promise. Sometimes healing doesn't mean things go back to how they were. It means learning to love what remains, and letting that be enough. It's been nearly 20 years since that season. The season when truth came knocking in the shape of a 14-year-old girl with Daniel's eyes. I'm 78 now, and the house is quieter than it used to be. Daisy's long gone, bless her, and the porch swing finally stopped squeaking after my grandson oiled it last spring. I spend my mornings the same way I always have. Tea by the kitchen window, sunlight on the geraniums, the newspaper folded neatly beside my plate. But some mornings, when the light hits just right, I still see it. That girl on my doorstep, clutching her backpack like it held her whole world. And I thank God I opened that door. Daniel passed away 5 years ago. Heart failure, sudden and merciful. We were sitting together that morning, sharing our quiet ritual of coffee and conversation, when his hand simply stopped moving toward the cup. He was gone before the steam faded. People always ask if I was angry, if I resented that he left me to carry the rest of our story alone. But the truth is, by the time he died, I had already grieved him once, back when the lie came to light. The man who left that day in the study wasn't the same man who sat beside me years later. Somewhere between guilt and redemption, he found peace. And I did too. Amara spoke at his funeral. She was 30 then, wearing a navy dress and the same steady expression she'd had since she was 14. Her voice didn't shake once. "I didn't know my father most of my childhood," she said, looking out over the congregation. "But when I finally met him, I realized something important. Sometimes, the best way to honor someone isn't by pretending they were perfect, but by forgiving them anyway." She glanced at me as she said it, and I nodded. Because forgiveness Real forgiveness isn't about erasing the hurt. It's about releasing the hold it has on your life. After the service, she came to sit beside me in the pew. She held my hand, same as she did that day years ago over a cup of tea. "You know," she whispered, "Mom was right. He was a good man, just not all at once." I laughed softly through the tears. "That's most of us, sweetheart." Amara's life bloomed beautifully after that. She finished college, became a social worker, and said she wanted to help kids who felt half invisible. She married a kind man named Jordan, and now she has 2 little ones who call me Grandma Mary. Every time they visit, they leave crumbs all over my carpet and fingerprints on the glass. And I wouldn't trade a single smudge of it. Sometimes I catch her watching her children. That same patient, gentle gaze that used to sit heavy on her mother's face. When she looks back at me, there's no trace of that lost 14-year-old. Just a woman who learned that love isn't always a gift wrapped in ribbon. Sometimes it's handed to you broken, and you mend it piece by piece until it fits your hands. A few months ago, Amara and I sat on this same porch, the air full of summer sounds, cicadas, laughter down the block, the ice clinking in our lemonade glasses. She asked, "Grandma Mary, do you ever regret forgiving him?" I took a long breath before answering. "Regret? No," I said. "I regret what it cost us. I regret the years I spent pretending everything was fine before I knew it wasn't. But forgiveness?" I smiled. "Forgiveness gave me my peace back. And it gave you a father. That's not something to regret." She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she reached out and took my hand. "You taught me what love really means," she said, "and what strength looks like. It's funny, I spent my whole life believing strength was about holding things together. But now, looking back, I know it's really about letting them fall apart when they need to. About standing still while the pieces settle, and then choosing, one by one, what's worth picking up again. When I tell this story, I don't do it to make anyone sad. I tell it because people need to know that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the middle. The rough, painful, transformative middle that turns you into who you were meant to be. I learned that love and truth can coexist, even when they hurt. That sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean staying. Sometimes it means walking away, but with your heart still open. After Daniel's death, I kept one thing of his on the mantle, that old ticking clock from the kitchen. It still works, still keeps time the same steady way it always did. I used to hate its ticking during those dark nights when it was the only sound in the house. Now it comforts me. It reminds me that life keeps moving. Minute by minute, heart by heart, every Thanksgiving, Amara and her family drive in from Chicago. We fill the house with noise again. Laughter, piano music, the smell of pie cooling on the counter. Her little boy, Nathan, once asked me, "Grandma, were you and Grandpa happy?" I smiled and said, "We were human, sweetheart." And sometimes that's even better, because being human means failing and fixing, breaking and rebuilding, loving and losing, and still showing up for what's left. These days, when I walk out to the porch at sunset, I talk to Daniel in my mind. Not the man who lied, but the man who tried to make it right. I tell him about the grandkids, about the new neighbors who mow their lawn too short, about how the church bell still misses the hour by 5 minutes. And sometimes, when the wind catches just so, I almost hear him laugh. Soft, familiar, forgiven. If you asked me what the moral of all this is, I'd say it's simple. You don't get to choose how love changes you, only whether you let it. And if ever life hands you a secret too heavy to carry, tell the truth anyway. You might lose someone's trust, but you'll find your own soul again. So tonight, as I sit here under the same porch light that's seen everything, I whisper a quiet thank you for truth, for mercy, for second chances that come wrapped in pain but bloom into grace. Because forgiveness, my dear, is not forgetting, it's remembering without the bitterness. You know, sweetheart, life doesn't always hand you the story you expected. Sometimes it hands you a truth that cracks everything open, and then quietly waits to see what you'll build from the pieces. When I look back now, I don't remember the pain as sharply as I remember the choices that came after it. The tea is on the table, the girl at the door, the moment I decided that love didn't end just because a promise did. That's what saved me. Not revenge, not denial, but the courage to do the right thing even when it broke my heart. And I think about Amara. grown now, with her children and her laugh that still sounds like sunlight through trees. She told me once that I changed her life, but the truth is, she saved mine too. She reminded me who I was before the hurt, a woman who believed in kindness, in grace, in second chances. If you've listened this far, maybe you know that kind of hurt. Maybe someone's lie turned your world upside down. Maybe you've sat in the dark, asking yourself how to forgive someone who didn't deserve it. Well, here's what I learned, darling. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. It's what sets you free from carrying someone else's mistakes inside your bones. And if you ever find yourself at that same crossroad, between anger and mercy, between leaving and loving, ask yourself this: would you rather be right or would you rather be whole? Because sometimes wholeness costs you your pride, but it gives you back your peace. When I tell this story now, I don't do it to make anyone cry. I tell it because every scar I carry has turned into a kind of wisdom, the kind that whispers, "You'll survive this too, sweetheart, so what would you have done if a girl showed up at your door? The living proof of someone else's secret. Would you have turned her away, or would you have let her in? Tell me in the comments below, darling. I'd love to hear your heart, and if this story touched you, maybe take a second to follow, to share it with someone who needs a little light tonight. Until next time, be kind, be brave, and keep your porch light on. Someone out there might be finding their way home.